the family dinner where my parents announced their estate plan, my father cleared his throat and said, "We've decided the house Rena lives in should be put in Samir's name to keep things fair for your brother." My mother nodded serenely. My brother smiled into his plate. And I set a single sheet of paper in the middle of the table and said, "Before anyone signs anything, I think the family should see the total. 8 years of it. Because there's a number on this page, and it's going to answer the question of what fair means in this family. Let me back up. My name is Reena Kapoor. I'm 37 years old, and for 8 years my parents used guilt obligation. My own sense of responsibility to extract nearly $200,000 from me, while my brother took and was celebrated for it. And then at the end, they tried to take my house too. This is the story of the day. I finally added it all up and read the number out loud. Let me tell you about my family, because the machine here is one a lot of people will recognize, and it runs on a fuel most families pretend doesn't exist, the idea that one child owes and the other is owed. I was the responsible one, from childhood. Good grades, careful with money, the one who could be counted on. My younger brother Samir was the charming one, the fun one, the one who struggled and needed help and got it. My parents loved us both, I believe that, even now, but they loved us differently, and the difference had a financial shape. Samir was someone to give to, I was someone to draw from. And they taught us both those roles so early and so thoroughly that neither of us questioned them until it nearly destroyed my life. I became successful. A pharmacist, steady income, careful savings, exactly the adult my careful childhood pointed toward. And the moment I had money, my role activated fully. It started as it always does, small and reasonable. My parents hit a rough patch, my father's business struggled, and they needed help with a few months of bills. Of course I helped. They were my parents. That's what you do. I paid a few months of their mortgage. I felt good about it. I was the responsible one. Being able to help was the reward for a lifetime of being counted on. But a few months became a year, and the help became structural. My parents, it turned out, had never managed money well. They'd spent for decades as if the future would handle itself. And once I started covering the gaps became permanent, because why would they change when Reena was there? I began paying their mortgage regularly. And their car payment. Then just this one medical bill, then another. Then Samir's needs, rooted through them, because Samir was always struggling, and helping Samir was framed as helping the family, and I was the family's wallet. Here's how the guilt worked, because the guilt is the whole engine. Every time I hesitated, every time I gently suggested my parents needed a real budget or that Samir needed to stand on his own, the machine turned on me. My mother would cry. "After everything we sacrificed for you," my father would go cold and wounded. "We didn't raise you to abandon your family." Samir would be hurt that I'd make him feel like a burden. And the extended family, aunts, uncles, the whole chorus, had absorbed the story that Reena was the successful one who could afford to help, and was getting a little full of herself, a little stingy, a little too impressed with her own money. Say no was to become, in the family's eyes, the ungrateful daughter who had money and wouldn't help her own struggling parents. So I didn't say no. For 8 years, I didn't say no. And I want to be honest about why, because it wasn't only guilt. It was identity. Being the responsible one, the one who could be counted on, was who I was. My whole self-worth was built on it. Saying no didn't just risk the family's anger, it risked the only version of myself I knew how to be. They didn't have to force me most of the time. They'd built me from childhood to force myself. Over 8 years, I paid. Their mortgage dozens of times over, car payments, medical bills, Samir's emergencies, property taxes. Loan to Samir for a business that failed, never repaid, never mentioned again. I didn't keep a running total at first, because keeping a total felt disloyal, felt like I was treating family love as a letter. That reluctance to count is exactly how the responsible child gets bled. You're too loyal to add it up, and they're counting on it. But somewhere around year 6, something in me started, quietly keeping receipts, not out of a plan. Out of a slowly growing unease, a sense that something was wrong that I couldn't yet name. I saved the bank transfers. I noted the payments. I built, almost without admitting it to myself, a record. And meanwhile, I'd bought a house, my house. Bought with my own money, my careful savings, the down payment I'd protected even while funding my family, a small act of self-preservation, a thing that was mine. I was proud of it in a way I was proud of almost nothing else, because it was the one thing my role hadn't consumed. Here's the day it broke, and it broke over the house. My parents called a family dinner to discuss their estate plan, which was a strange thing for them to have, given that I'd been paying their bills for 8 years, and they had, as far as I knew, almost nothing to leave. But they framed it with great seriousness, the whole family invited, and I came, dutifully, the responsible one answering the summons. And over dinner, my father cleared his throat and made the announcement. They'd been thinking about fairness. They were concerned that Samir, who'd had a harder time, didn't have the security I had. And so they decided, past tense, without me, that the house Reena lives in should be put in Samir's name, to keep things fair. I need you to understand the full, breathtaking architecture of what they were proposing. My house, bought with my money that I lived in that they had contributed exactly nothing toward, was to be signed over to my brother because I'd been given so much, my own earnings. Apparently, and Samir had been given so little, only 8 years of my money funneled through them. They had so completely erased the direction, the money actually flowed that they'd arrived at a version of reality where I was the privileged one who owed my brother my home. And here's the thing that told me exactly how the 8 years had ended up working. My mother nodded serenely, my brother smiled into his plate, and around the table the extended family nodded along. Because they'd been fed the story for years that Reena had so much and gave so little. Nobody at that table in that moment thought the plan was outrageous. That's how thoroughly the machine had rewritten the truth. For one moment, the old me almost went along with it. That's the part that frightens me still. 8 years of trained obligation, the whole family nodding, my mother's serene face. I felt the pull to just absorb this too, to be the responsible one, to not make a scene. I felt myself reaching for the yes. And then I thought about the receipts. 6 years of them, by then, saved in a folder I'd been almost afraid to look at. And I understood that if I said yes to this, there would never be a bottom. I would take the house, and then they would need the next thing, and I would give and give until there was nothing left of me, because a machine that has decided you owe everything never reaches a point where the debt is paid. So I did the thing I'd been too loyal to do for 8 years. I added it up. I stepped out to the restroom, and I sat there, and I did the math on my phone. 6 years of saved records plus my honest estimate of the two before I started saving, and the number that came back knocked the breath out of me. And I went back to the table, and I set a single sheet of paper in the middle of it. Before anyone signs anything, I said, I think the family should see the total, 8 years of it. Rena, my mother started, this isn't the time for. It's exactly the time, I said. You've called the family together to discuss fairness and to decide who deserves what. So let's have that conversation with actual numbers for once. Here's the total of what I've paid this family over the last 8 years. And I said the number. Just under $200,000. I watched it land on the extended family, the aunts and uncles who'd absorbed the story that I gave so little. You could see the number not fitting into the story they'd been told, the two things grinding against each other. That's the mortgage on their house, I said, paid by me dozens of times, the car payments, the medical bills, the property taxes, Samir's failed business loan that was never repaid or mentioned again. 8 years of every gap in this family's finances, filled by me, quietly, while being told I was the privileged one. Every time I hesitated, I was told I was abandoning my family. And now you've brought everyone here to sign my house, the one thing I bought with my own money, the one thing this machine hasn't eaten, over to Samir because it's fair. The table was silent. My father's face had gone rigid. So let's talk about fair, I said. In 8 years, I have given this family $200,000. In 8 years, Samir has given this family nothing and taken a great deal and been celebrated as the one who has it hard. And your estate plan, your idea of fairness, is to take my home and give it to him too. That's not fairness. That's the final step of something that's been happening my whole life, and I only just found the nerve to add it up. Samir, to his credit or his shame, couldn't look at me. My mother reached for the tears that had worked for 8 years. After everything Don't, I said gently, and it was the gentleness that stopped her, because I wasn't angry, I was finished. The after everything we sacrificed line has cost me $200,000 and almost cost me my house. It doesn't work anymore, Mom. I added it up. You can't guilt someone with a number in front of them. Here is how it ended, and it ended not with a courtroom but with something I think is rarer and harder, a boundary that held. There was no crime here my parents hadn't stolen. I'd given under pressure, but given. So there was nothing to prosecute and nothing to claw back, and I made my peace with the $200,000 being gone. What there was a choice, keep feeding the machine or turn it off. And that sheet of paper, read out loud in front of the whole family, turned it off, because the machine ran entirely on a story, and the number destroyed the story in front of the only audience that mattered. The house stayed mine, obviously. It had never been theirs to give, and now the whole family knew it. I never signed a thing, and I stopped. That was the real ending. I told my parents clearly and without cruelty that the 8 years of payments were over. That I loved them and would help them find actual resources. A real budget, social services, the things a functioning family uses instead of bleeding one child. But that the era of Renia's wallet was finished. And I meant it, and I held it, even through the campaign that followed, because a machine doesn't shut off quietly. There were months of guilt, of extended family pressure, of my mother's tears and my father's cold silence and Samir's wounded messages. I held the boundary through all of it. Holding it was the hardest thing I've ever done, harder than paying ever was, because paying was familiar and boundaries were not. The extended family split. Some of them, once they'd seen the number, were quietly horrified at what they'd participated in and came to me privately, ashamed. Others stayed loyal to the old story, because the old story was more comfortable than admitting it helped guilt a woman out of her savings for 8 years. I let the second group go. That was part of the boundary, too, accepting that some people needed me to be the villain so they didn't have to look at themselves. My parents, faced with the actual consequences of their spending for the first time in a decade, did what people do when the enabling stops. They struggled, and then, slowly, they adjusted. Not gracefully. But they downsized, they got help. They lived within their means for the first time in their adult lives. The exact thing my 8 years of payments had prevented, because you cannot rescue someone out of a hole they're being paid to stay in. A leaving was, in the end, the only thing that ever made them climb out. Samir and I barely speak. I don't hate him. He was built by the same machine that built me, just handed the taking role instead of the giving one, and that's its own kind of damage. But I can't be close to someone who smiled into his plate while our parents tried to sign him my house. Maybe someday. Not now. I bought that house to have one thing the machine hadn't eaten. It turned out to be the thing that saved me, because the moment they reached for it, I finally reached for the receipts. For 8 years, after everything we sacrificed for you, was the most expensive sentence in my life. It cost me $200,000 because I was too loyal to ever add it up. So I added it up, and it turns out you cannot guilt a person who is holding the total. My father asked what fair meant in this family. I put it on one sheet of paper, in the middle of the table, and let the number answer him.